The first grade teacher was a single, attractive young lady, and she had a room at a house in the next block from our house because her parents knew those parents. And so she taught first grade, and she was single, and she had a boyfriend, and I don't know how they knew me or liked me. I think Daddy was her doctor, but anyway, they would pick me up and take me to the drugstore for an ice cream cone frequently. And so I wanted to go to her first grade class, but my birthday was not till March, and you had to be 6 by January 1st to go to first grade. And I wasn't 6 until March. But Miss Culp was her name, and she told Mother to let me come on to her class, and I'd get tired of it, but let me come as long as I wanted to. And so I went to her class, and I never got tired of it. I stayed all year, so they had to put me in second grade instead of making me repeat that first grade. See, with Margaret and Charles being older than Billy, they didn't want to listen to him, so that's why he taught me. And Gorin had just written his books, so Billy taught me from those books and taught himself. Well, Mother played bridge all the time, but she never had read Gorin's books. She just played party bridge. Margaret, Charles, and Billy sort of ran around together, and Richmond and I did. And people came over to our house to play every day because we had a large property, and there were always games going on. We had pole vaulting, we had croquet, we played kick the can. There were always games going on. Well, the block, I think of it being divided into thirds, and our house was 2/3 of the block, and this third was a hospital. As I used to go over to the hospital, if we ran out of sugar or milk or something, bread, I could go to the kitchen of the hospital and I got a loaf of bread or a pound of butter, and they just kept a running account, and Daddy paid it at the end of the month. It was like a grocery store for us. And we had an interesting life. And Daddy liked to tinker with things, and we had a dishwasher that he bought from the hospital. It was about as big as that desk, and the motor was over here, and then the top lifted up, and you had to stack the dishes in it. Then you had to pour the water in it. Then you shut the lid, and then you push this lever to make it start. And then it would start swishing the water around. Then you had to put the bucket underneath and drain all that dirty water off. Then you had to shut the drain, fill it back up with water, push that lever. It was a lot of work running that dishwasher. And then Daddy bought this Scandinavian stove from a restaurant in Salisbury. It was the kind that always stays hot, and you raise this big heavy lid, and just a portion of a pan has to be touching this hot part, and it heats the whole pan. But it used a special kind of coal. I don't remember whether it was bituminous or anthracite, but I think it was bituminous, and nobody sold it in Greensboro. So Daddy had to order a boxcar of this coal from Pennsylvania and have it delivered by train to Salisbury. And then I can see Dick, old Dick who worked for us, shoveled it through the basement window. And that's what we used to get this stove going. Well, he said there'll be many boys that you could marry and be happy with. But he said, don't marry one unless you can't be happy without it. That was good advice, because when somebody asked me to marry him, I thought, I can be happy without you. So I didn't marry him. Well, it was in Miami Beach, and your Uncle Charles was playing with Mother, and Billy and I were following them from table to table. And so the people at the table that he had just left would tell us how funny that couple was. They didn't know we were related. And they'd say that he just thought of a funny joke, and they told it to us, and it was the same joke at every table. But they didn't know it. But Charles would get tickled and start laughing before he even started telling the joke. The same joke, all 13 tables. No, Mother did not cook. She made candy, but that was all. She didn't plan the meals, she didn't cook. Daddy planned all the meals, and he bought the groceries. See, my Daddy told me not to drink and not to smoke, that they were detrimental to your health. And I never did. I didn't drink and I did not smoke. And all my friends did both of those things. The way he taught me things constantly, because being a doctor, he made house calls every afternoon, and he would pick me up from my grandmother's house, and I would ride with him when he made house calls, and he was always teaching me something. I could count to 20 in French and German, and I could recite poetry. He used that time as learning time for me, and I cherished that time.
Do you still remember any poem that you learned as a child?
Yeah. I remember the little house where I was born, the little windows where the sun came peeping in at morn. Never came a week too soon, nor brought too long a day, but now I often wish the wind had borne my breath away. Well, Mother wanted me to go to St. Mary's, and I had a roommate for my sophomore year at UNCG, and my roommate was elected a house president. And in those days, I don't know what they do now, but in those days, the house presidents got together and they drew a number, and my friend drew number 1, which meant she got her pick of all the dormitories. We could pick our dormitory, and of course, being a house president, we got the best room in the dormitory. Well, she picked number 1, so we had the best room in the building we wanted. And of course, Mother wanted me to go to St. Mary's. And so we were having dinner one night, and she was lamenting the fact that neither one of her daughters was going to St. Mary's. And somebody in the family had always gone. And I said to my mother, if it means that much to you, I'll go to St. Mary's for this year, and then I'll transfer back to UNCG, because St. Mary's was just a junior college. And so Mother went to Raleigh the next day and talked to Miss Cruikshank, who was the head mistress, and Miss Cruikshank said I could stay at her house till somebody dropped out of school. They always did. Well, Mother came home. I can see it just as clearly right now. She was so excited. She had this big smile on her face, and she said, you can go to St. Mary's. Well, I crumpled to the floor, and the tears started going down my cheeks, and she thought I was crying for joy. I had to call my to-be roommate and tell her I couldn't room with it. I had to go since I told her I would. But you know, it was the greatest thing. I wouldn't take anything for it. And I didn't have to stay at Miss Cruikshank's house at all, because somebody dropped out before the school started. And I really loved it, but that's what made me go to state, was because here I was stuck at St. Mary's, so I told them I had to take a course they didn't offer. So I took analytical geometry and calculus at state, and I had an 8 o'clock class 5 days a week. Well, St. Mary's was on a different system, you know, where you just went Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or Tuesday and Thursday. But I had 8 o'clock classes at state, so I missed breakfast and I missed chapel every day. When the bell rang for the girls to go to breakfast, I'd get out of bed and dress and walk to state, no matter what the weather, and take my class, and then go by their mop-up and get a milkshake after class for my breakfast and walk back. But I walked to state from St. Mary's every day, no matter what the weather, rain, shine, sleet, snow.
And you had a milkshake for breakfast?
Well, after breakfast, that was my breakfast. I'd go to the mop-ups, what they called it, at state. Well, where was I going to get breakfast? I didn't have a kitchen.
I presume someplace sold something other than milkshakes.
Well, there was a Tuttle House down the street from St. Mary's, but state was that way, the Tuttle House was this way, and I didn't want to get up in time to go eat breakfast before my class. So that's just how it was. Because your Uncle Billy went there, and I wanted to go there.
And you just thought maybe they'd let you be the first?
Yeah, they had to be a first. Why not let it be me? And I told them I'd find my own place to stay. And I told them my sister had been to Radcliffe, which is in Boston, for her graduate work. And they still wouldn't let me come.
But they admitted you first, right?
Well, they thought I was a male.
Yeah.
They admitted me. I was a junior here at Chapel Hill, and they admitted me, and I could come provided my grade level stayed what it was. And then they suddenly realized, came to their attention, and they said that I was a female, and they didn't take female. 1949, and we drove were driving to Chicago, but when we went through the Pennsylvania, the tunnel, when we came out of the tunnel, it was snowing and the wind was blowing and it just swept the car into a snowbank. So we caught a ride with somebody and they took us to the train, and we got on the train and went to Chicago, just left the car there in the snowbank. And when we came back, we got a taxi out to the tunnel, and there was the car right there against where it had skidded off the road. It wouldn't be there today, but nobody had stolen the tires or anything. So we just got in and came on home. Some hay meat and hay no eat, and some hay eat and hay no meat. But we hay eat and we hay meat, so to the Lord we thank ye. And we were all laughing so hard, because he could started laughing, thinking about it while he was saying it, that we all were laughing. Aunt Margaret gave a beautiful luncheon. We got married at 11 o'clock in Pinehurst, and then at the hotel she had a luncheon just for the family, all that was there. Bill Transue brought his dogs because it was the first day of hunting season. He did well to come because he did love to hunt and fish. We were going to get married after Christmas, but then Willie decided he thought it would be nice for us to get married before Christmas so that we would be there with the children. Jane Howard and Billy, you see, lived with us instead of their mother, because their mother was an alcoholic, and so the court gave Willie the children. And it was a good chance for us all to be together. Willie and Billy Woodson had gone to a bridge tournament in Richmond, and I started having labor pains, and so Billy Holderness knew how to drive. He could drive when he was 14 around the circle in the backyard. So he was getting ready to drive me to the hospital when your daddy and Uncle Billy pulled in the driveway back from the bridge tournament, so they took me. So I got to the hospital. I never did go in a labor room with any of you 4 children. I always went straight to delivery, and you were born. That was it. Well, Jane Howard Holderness was living in New York and working in New York, and she liked to work with television, and she had gotten Chuck a spot on a quiz show, and the quiz show had these young boys who were all supposed to be chewing gum, bubble gum, but only one had the bubble gum, and the panel was supposed to vote on which boy really had the chewing gum. There were 3 of them. And so she got Chuck to be on that program. So we flew to New York on a Wednesday morning, early flight, and no, we didn't. We took the train up, and I had a little overnight train case. So when we were, let's see what I did. I checked it, at Grand Central Station. And while we were on the street walking to the TV, I bumped into Spencer Love, and in the course of the conversation, he asked if we wanted a flight back with the Burr Mill plane that afternoon. And we did, and so I was in Grand Central to turn in my train ticket, and I asked Chuck to go pick up the makeup case from that little locker I'd put it in. Well, after Chuck left to go get it, I realized it was on the level below us, and I just couldn't imagine how Chuck would find us. I think he was 6 years old. But I couldn't go look for him because then he might come back and not find me. So I had to stay where I was until he came back. But he managed to get the case out of the locker and come back and find me. But that was a long time for me to hold my breath waiting for him to get back. He always had Hershey bars in his coat pockets. I loved seeing him. He enjoyed them so much. And you don't remember much about him, but he was so casual about everything. And he would run out of gas because he hated to stop and take that time to fill up the gas tank, so he would let it get down to empty before he'd stop to get gas. And frequently it'd run out, and the car would sit somewhere for a few days before we'd go get gas and put in it. I'd drive him to work, and I'd go pick him up at lunch and take him back after lunch. And one time I remember saying, I don't think we need 2 cars. And he said, well, who did you have in mind not having one? Well, it was true. Isn't that funny? But he'd leave the car just sitting there when he gave out of gas for days. I mean, it didn't bother him a bit. Tomorrow, nothing bothered him. Somebody had bet him. He and Martha had company over for a cocktail, and I don't know how it came up, but somebody bet him he couldn't do that. They were talking about what a good golfer he was. And they bet that he couldn't do it. And he bet he could, and he did. And that was when there was a circle around the backyard with cars parked in it. You don't remember that because we had it done, the backyard done over, but it used to be you drove in and there was a circle, and it was wide enough for cars to be parked and cars to pass. And the fish pool was in the middle with shrubbery planted around. And those cars parked around the driveway, and I never saw a dent in one of the cars.
Did you ever see him hit it over the house?
Yeah, but I wasn't in the backyard where it landed, but I was in the front yard where he hit it from. I know that he did not drink coffee. He didn't like coffee, but he loved coffee ice cream, and nobody made coffee ice cream in those days. So he made it with instant coffee and mixed it up, but it was always interesting to me that he liked coffee ice cream. And never drank a cup of coffee that I know of. Your daddy wanted me to go over there to see her. She was working at the World's Fair and in Brussels. And I had just had Hayes had been born. And I just didn't want to go over there and leave you children. And so at a cocktail party, your daddy told Catherine Chandler from Burlington, who was a friend, we had a weekly bridge game, if she could get me to go, he would give her the trip. And she was so excited because she'd always wanted to go to Europe and she'd never been able to. And so it put pressure on me because I was keeping her from this wonderful trip she wanted to go on. I remember the tears just coming down my cheeks when that plane took off from Greensboro. But it was a wonderful trip. And I planned it, we were gone a month. We flew to London and came on down, ended up in Paris, flew back on the week of the first jets over the ocean. I got a certificate from Eastern Airlines saying I was a passenger the first week of the jets over the Atlantic.
So, if you didn't want to go, I mean, it was nice of you to go, but why'd you go for a month? I mean, it seems like you could have gone for a week or two. You had a newborn at home.
Well, so much to see. We started in London and then went all down through Italy and France. It does look like I wouldn't have stayed that long. Mother would leave cookies out for the mailman and a pitcher of lemonade, and she would leave her front door open. And so Chuck used to be at her house a lot with Bibi, and when the mailman came, one time Chuck told him he better watch out because next thing he knew she might be hiding his shoes because Dennis the Menace, on that program, the woman had been hiding the mailman's shoes trying to get him to come in. Oh, me. She never had a checking account because Daddy didn't think that she could handle it. So he just left her, asked the bank to send her a certain amount of money the first of every month. So they did. Well, they'd send a check. Well, she would cash the check and just spend the money. And one time she called us and said she had paid the dentist his bill, but he had sent her another bill and hadn't given her credit for the payment. And so your daddy told her she needed to have a checking account and pay by check so that wouldn't happen again. And she said, well, her husband told her that she really never should have a checking account because it'd be better for her to just spend the cash. But because she had this checking account, at the end of the month, your daddy called me and told me to check with her because the banks said she was overdrawn, and for me to call her and see if anything was the matter. So I called her and I said, did you know you were overdrawn at the bank? She said, yes. And I said, well, you're not supposed to do that. And she said, well, I just figured the plumber needed the money worse than the bank. And she knew she'd be getting some. Well, anyway, one time she said she had paid this bill to somebody and he hadn't given her credit for it. She'd given it cash. So that's when Willie said he was going to set up a checking account. Well, she wrote the last check for 4 cents. And that was, and that was all she had left in her account. And so Willie told her, well, she had just closed out her account. And she said she thought you were supposed to do that every month to balance the check. She was so funny. She loved to give people things, you know. She loved to give things away. And you remember going over to her house in the afternoons, because she loved for you to come over there. And she always put out juice and cookies for the postman. And she would leave her front door wide open all day long. When she left home, the door would be wide open. And Greensboro started having robberies, and Willie told her she ought to lock her door when she left. And she had said she didn't even have a key. So he sent a locksmith out to make a key for her. And then we went by to pick her up one day after that, and he said, Big Branch, you got your, or did you lock your door? And she opened the pocketbook and took the key out, and she said, no, but I got my key. She just could not lock her door. It was so funny. Jan Holden was really responsible for our trip. Did you know that? Well, at church on Sunday in April, Sandra was home from Randolph-Macon, and she asked if she could ride home from church with us. And so on the way home, Jan's engagement picture had been in our paper. And I said what a pretty picture of Jan it was. And Sandra agreed, and I said how lucky she was. She was marrying somebody in the diplomatic service. They were going to be living in Greece, and I said I always wanted to go to Greece. And Sandra said she had too. And so your daddy said, well, why don't you two go to Greece and wherever you want to go after the wedding, after Jane's wedding. And so Sandra said she'd ask her mother, because she was going to get married in August. And so we put an ad at her house, and we went home, and here Sandra came running down the street, and she said that her mother said she could go on the trip if she would be home 1 month before her wedding. So the next day I went down to Lucas Travel and planned our trip. And I went east. Most people go west and come back, I think, but I went east so we'd have an extra day instead of losing a day. And we did get back a month before her wedding to Lawrence. But it's a great trip. But the interesting thing is that Jane called off her wedding. She's never gotten married to this day. But if she hadn't announced her engagement, we wouldn't have had that trip.
Why did she call off the wedding?
Who knows? You don't ask somebody that. But I do think somebody did ask her that recently. And I've forgotten who it was. But they did ask her because I remember her answer. She said that she saw this man walking down the street across from her, and she thought, that's what my husband's to be is going to look like in a few years. She didn't want that, so she called off her wedding, and she's never gotten married to this day. And if it hadn't been for her, we would never had our trip around the world.
So how did it go from going to Greece to going around the world?
Well, we just kept going that way. Well, and you were so good, you know. I would put you to bed, and I had a low bed for you that you could climb in and out of, and so that you didn't have to stay in it. You could play with your toys and then get back in that bed. And my friends couldn't believe it, and they would come over to see this phenomenon. And I had, I left your door open, and I told you if you wanted to cry, that you could, but if you cried, I was going to shut the door because it hurt my ears. But as long as you didn't cry, I'd leave the door open. So you never cried, and I never had to shut the door. And you were in that little trundle bed. You never slept in a baby bed with high sides to it. It wasn't a playroom in the basement exactly. It was halfway sort of fixed up, but not really, but it had a ping pong table down there. So they had brought it up to the living room, pushed the furniture aside and put that ping pong table up in the living room.
And did they not put it back before you got home?
You would have thought they would. Yeah, well, that was when we first started going out. I was in the dry cleaners, and Nick had been in Palm Beach, but he had flown back up for a benefit at the club. They had asked him to, to be a sponsor of it, so he had given the money for the orchestra, and he flew up for it. And that's where I saw him, was in the dry cleaners, and he asked me if I was going, and I said no, and he said, well, I want you to go with me. I'll pick you up such a time. And so I went with him, and that's how we started going out, was if I happened to be in that dry cleaners when ordinarily he'd never set foot in the dry cleaners. Mac would pick up his things, but he just had flown up for that party. He knew what he liked, and he knew good quality when he saw it. And he enjoyed beautiful things. We had rented a house in Palm Beach for 3 months. So we went down the 1st of February, and Nick wanted to go shopping with me to get a new evening gown. So we went to Saks, and the sales lady brought out some evening gowns, and Nick looked at them. He said, take these back and bring the most beautiful gown that you've got in this store. And so she took those 3 gowns back and brought a gown in that was gorgeous. It was designed by Sophie of Saks, and BB still has the top part of that dress, but that was a long time ago, but my portrait is with that dress on. It's hanging right over there on the wall. Well, when I got home from that trip, we'd been gone 6 weeks. There was a message on my answering machine from Bill Elmore asking me if I would please call him. Well, I knew what Bill Elmore looked like, and I've forgotten how I happened to even know that, because we did have one child in the same grade in school. He had a son named Bill, and I had a daughter named BB, and they were in the same room at Irving Park School. But then his son was died. He was killed. And that was so hard on Bill. He never got over that. And anyway, he had called me. I thought he was calling me for the every member canvas. But he wanted to ask me a hypothetical question, he said. And it was, if he asked me to go out to dinner with him, would I say yes? And I said, well, I thought that would be lovely to go out to dinner with him if he asked me. And so then he said, well, goodbye. And so it took him 2 days to call me back to see if I would go out to dinner with him. Well, I was going to Florida, and Nita was going with me because I had just bought that apartment in Park Place. And we were going down to see about getting some furniture for her. So when he called me, I couldn't go, but after I got back home, I did go out with him.
Did it work?
Well, I mean, I don't think about the things that might have been different. You can't do anything about them, they're over. I've had a very interesting life. But Daddy told me not to get married right after school. He said, you need to go do things between graduation and getting married. And he was right, you know, all my friends graduated and then got married and started having children. They didn't get to travel and do things. I had a wonderful time working in New York. It was hard to stop.